Aan die boepunt van die geskiedkundige Gouvermentslaan in Kaapstad, omring deur mooi ou akkerbome, is die Klein Teater geleë. Deur die jare is van ons land se beste akteurs, regisseurs en teatertegnici hier opgelei. En so het die teater 'n groot en belangrike bydrae gelewer tot die ontwikkeling van die toneel. Vandag is daar verskeie dramadepartemente, maar die Klein Teater met sy charmante Regency-voorkoms is die oudste. Dit het ook 'n interessante verbintenis met Kaapstad se eie teatergeskiedenis. Die bekende regisseur Robert Moore is die huidige direkteur van die Klein Teater en ook die hoof van die dramadepartement.
You have not kept your promise that I should hear Mass, and that I should receive the body of the Lord, and be relieved of my fetters.
Stronger, you're working up the clouds. Come on, you can do it, go ahead.
Okay. Where should I start from?
Just carry on.
I would rather die than be kept in irons.
Since last Thursday, have you heard the voices of St. Catherine and St. Margaret?
Yes!
Challenge them.
And what did they tell you?
God sent word by them that I'd put myself in great danger of perdition, and that I'd consented to make the abjuration and renunciation in order to save my life, and that I'm damned for doing so.
And open your throat. Damned. You are damned for doing so. Think about what it means, the implications of all that. Tell it to me. I am damned for doing so.
And I am damned for doing so. In saying that God had not sent me, I have damned myself.
Robert Moore het in 1960 by die Klein Teater begin klasgee. Sedert die stigting van die Klein Teater in 1931 deur professor W.H. Bell, is talle toneelstukke, operas en ballette hier opgevoer.
This auditorium where I'm sitting now doesn't look very different today from what it looked like in 1934. Quite remarkable, isn't it? Nearly 50 years ago. But when it first started, was in 31, it was just a sort of a rectangle. It was an old chemistry lab. The university moved out to Rondebosch, and the professor of music grabbed it for a theatre, Professor Bell. He started the whole thing. And he used to make all the scenery himself, and he had his wife cutting up curtains for costumes, and he started this thing and made it into something very interesting in 4 or 5 years' time. Then he had to retire, and the next professor of music wasn't interested in the theatre. So Dulcie Howes looked after it for a year, then she went on leave, then the university didn't know what to do, so they sent for the professor of French, that's me, and said, would you like to try? And without asking myself for a minute whether I was really fit to do it, I said yes, and I stayed there for 37 years.
Met hierdie toneelstuk The Seagull van Anton Tchekhov is die Klein Teater in Augustus 1931 geopen. Opvoerings van hoogstaande gehalte sal hier aangebied deur die personeel en ook regisseurs van buite.
Outstanding productions, I think one must date that from the time when we started getting really professional people in. The first one was André van Geyzegem, and he came in 37 and did Man and Superman with the Repertory Society. The next year we had Leontine Sagan, and she came straight from Drury Lane, where she'd been doing all sorts of Ivor Novello things. We were dead scared of her. And she did Doctor's Dilemma. And that set a standard for us, of course, that we had never had before. We had to rehearse every day, and the weekends she treated us like professionals. I remember Leontine once, I said to her, do you find it very different working with the amateurs from the professionals? And with her deep voice she said, oh, the amateurs are much more polite.
Die eerste opvoering van Waiting for Godot van Samuel Beckett is deur Leonard Schach vir die Klein Teater in 1955 opgevoer. Die regie van Oh What a Lovely War is deur Mavis Taylor gedoen, een van die lektrises verbonde aan die dramadepartement. En Seppuku is gedoen deur Robert Moore. Dit was 'n besonder interessante opvoering. Ruth Peffers was die eerste hoof van die spraak- en dramadepartement. In 1950 het Rosalie van der Gucht by haar oorgeneem. Sy het waardevolle werk by die Klein Teater gedoen totdat sy in 1971 afgetree het.
For the 21st birthday of the Little Theatre, I directed the Oresteia. It was very bold. I did the 3 sections, the Agamemnon, the Libation Bearers, and the Eumenides, and turned it into 3 one-act plays, cut and arranged by the classics department. I don't think I'd ever dare do such a thing again. And at the time, I don't think it had been very often done, at any rate not in English.
As ek 'n enkele persoon moet noem vir wie ek die grootste agting in ons toneel het, sal ek moet kies tussen P.P. Breitenbach en Rosalie Vandergood. Dit is die grootste voorreg van my loopbaan dat ek albei so goed geken het. Ek is aan hulle baie, baie verskuldig. Rosalie Vandergood se menslikheid, haar vlamskerp intelligensie, haar toegewydheid aan die taak, is die dinge wat ek dink so uitstaande van haar is. Dis sy wat my alles geleer het van my geliefde Anton Tjechov, om hom te verstaan en om hom op te voer.
Rosalie van der Koegt is oor die hele land bekend vir haar skitterende Tjechov-opvoerings.
We've had some very interesting guest players with us at the Little Theatre. At one time, we made a point of inviting outsiders to play with the students. And some of them, of course, have gone on and become famous professionals. One thinks, of course, of Yvonne Bryceland immediately. And then there's Percy Seif, who's extremely well known, I think, in South Africa today. And, of course, Babs Laker has played on more than one occasion. She played in Antony and Cleopatra, as Cleopatra, with Percy Seif as Antony. For me, that was my production. And also for the Sartre version of the Trojan Women, when she played Hecuba.
Rosalie is een van daardie mense wat totaal opgaan in die werk, as onderwyseres, as regisseuse. Haar invloed op die Suid-Afrikaanse toneel is onberekenbaar, maar mense weet dit nie, omdat sy so beskeie mens is. Sy verkoop haarself nooit nie, want sy is nie belangrik nie. Wat vir haar wel belangrik is die taak. Sy is totaal toegewyd en het my hopelik ook geleer dat die belangrikste ding in 'n toneelopvoering is die werk. Dit is wat jy vir jou publiek lewer, dis die eerlikheid teenoor jou publiek, teenoor jou medespelers en teenoor jou skrywer, veral teenoor jou skrywer. Daardie piëteit van Rosalie is haar uitstaande kenmerk en die totale afwesigheid van die soort egoïsme wat in die pad van 'n kunstenaar se werk kan kom. Jare gelede was ek eintlik bekend as 'n soort van 'n wille avant-garde regisseur. Een van daai wille dinge wat ek gedoen het was 'n opvoering The Sport of My Mad Mother wat ek met 'n groep studente hier gedoen het. Ek dink dit was rondom 61. En tot my verbuistering het dit so getref dat ons 3 seisoene in die Kaap daarmee gespeel het en toegenooi is om dit in Engeland te gaan speel by 'n fees van studente drama. Ons het ook daar gevra om die Royal Court aan te bied. Dit was baie gek geweest dat 'n groep studente uit Suid-Afrika deur 'n Afrikaner geregisseer na Cockneyland gaan met 'n Cockney stuk. Maar nou ja, dit het getref, dit het invloed gehad en dit was lekker. Die Japanse toneel is vir my baie belangrik. My eerste werk in die opsig was 'n produksie van Rashomon. Dit was my eie aanpassing van die rolprent wat in 1951 geskep is. My opvoering was 14 of 15 jaar later natuurlik. Maar daarna het ek die kabuki toneel in Japan gaan bestudeer. Dit 'n openbaring gevind. En ek het hier plaaslik, ek dink vir die eerste keer in 'n westerse taal, probeer om kabuki te herskep. Ek het die opvoering 2 maal gedoen onder die titel seppuku wat ons ken as harakiri. En die tegnieke en estetische beginsels van die Japanse toneel het ek toegepas op baie ander werke en my eie werk is vol baie manifestasies van daardie voortreffelike tradisie. Ek dink dit my werk verryk en ek hoop die werk van my studente en my medewerkers in die toneel. Ek dink 'n mens se hele werk in die toneel as regisseur is betekenisvol of betekenisloos. Maar as ek dinge moet uitsonder, dan sou ek sê my werk aan Shakespeare in Suid-Afrika was belangrik, omdat ek weggebreek het van die plaaslik aanvaarde konvensies wat bietjie Victoriaans gebly het. En ek het hulle probeer oopbreek met dinge soos my verskeie Hamlets en dan Midsummer Night's Dream, waar mense my baie verkwalik het en ander mense dit weer gevind het dat dit 'n deurbraak was. Ek het probeer om 'n positiewe plaaslike Suid-Afrikaanse tradisie van Shakespeare in die lewe te roep.
The Linden Tree. Dit was een van Rosalie van der Koegt se opvoerings. Little Malcolm and the Struggle Against the Eunuchs. Die regie is gedoen deur Mavis Taylor. Behind the Yellow Door van Flora Store. Robert Moore is genooi om hierdie toneelstuk in Amerika met studente op die planke te bring. Die Klein Teater het 'n lang verbintenis met die toneelgeskiedenis van Kaapstad. So het die Cape Town Repertory Society in 1934 hulle eerste toneelstuk hier opgevoer. Die nasionale toneelorganisasie se eerste 2 opvoerings, Altyd my liefste en Dear Brutus, het ook in die Klein Teater plaasgevind. Beroemde plaaslike en buitelandse regisseurs het al hier gewerk. Die werk van die wêreld se beste dramaturge, van ou Griekse tragedies tot die jongste eksperimentele werk, word gereeld in die Klein Teater opgevoer. Die Gondoliers, almal amateurspelers wat opgetree het in die Johannesburgse opera en dramavereniging se opvoerings. Eintlik musiek bly spele, want daarvoor was hierdie vereniging veral bekend. JODV, Johannesburg se oudste vermaaklikheidsgroep, is in 1919 gestig en Dorothy was al die eerste opvoering in 1920 in die ou Palladium. En van toe was vrolike musiekblyspele gereeld deur hulle op die planke gebring. Ou gunstelinge was Iolanthe, The Country Girl, Santoy, The Mikado, The Pirates of Penzance, Mary England, Chu Chin Chow en ander.
I'm such a silly when the moon comes out. I never seem to know what I'm about. Hopping, never stopping. I can't keep still although I try. I'm all a quiver when the moonbeams glance. That is the moment when I long to dance. I can never close a sleepy eye when the moon comes creeping through the sky.
Hulle eerste musiekblyspel was in die ou Palladium, daarna in die His Majesty's in die 30er jare, later ook in die Empire, Standard, die Alexander en in die 60er jare in die Stadskouburg van Johannesburg. Daar was altyd goeie samewerking tussen die JODV en African Consolidated Theatres en E.W. Schlesinger was hulle eerste president. Hulle dikwels van African Theatre se teaters, hulle garderobe, asook van hulle tegnici gebruik gemaak. Toe in 1942 Chu Chin Chow opgevoer het, was dit in samewerking met African Theatres. Ander produksies waarin hulle saamgewerk het, was The Desert Song in 1943 en Maid of the Mountains in 1944. Baie akteurs, sangers, dansers en tegnici wat vandag in die professionele teater werk, het by die JODV begin en is daar opgelei. In 1966 het hulle die ou Alhambra in Doringfontein gekoop en later omgeskep in 'n volwaardige teater. Muriel Alexander, die stigter en lewenslange erepresident van die Johannesburgse Repertory Players. 'n merkwaardige vrou, na wie 'n teater in Suid-Afrika vernoem is. Iemand wat jarelang met liefde en toewyding vir die toneel gewerk het.
She got a lot of her younger pupils together and decided that the thing to do was to start a dramatic society. There was very little theatre in Johannesburg in those days. The greatest thing was to go to the Empire, which was a music hall. But for real theatre, there was very little indeed. Anyway, we started this dramatic society, and we soon came round to play readings and producing short amateur plays in various halls. Then Muriel got the idea of forming the Johannesburg Repertory Players. Now, this was to be real theatre. She chose as her first play, R.U.R., Rossum's Universal Robots. Of course, robots in those days were unknown as we talk about traffic lights today. But I must say that probably the traffic lights got their name from Rossum's Universal Robots. We decided that we ought to do something a little bit classical. Shakespeare, of course, was the obvious choice, and The Merchant of Venice was chosen. Unfortunately, we had no money. We couldn't afford the classic costumes that were necessary. So we decided to do the play in modern dress. Now, Shakespeare in modern dress, all those years ago, created quite a panic amongst the theatrical supporters. But nevertheless, we persevered. I remember playing the part of Shylock in a frock coat, which I had borrowed from my father, and a bowler hat, which I had borrowed from the father of a young friend of mine. All the costumes were therefore improvised, and I must say that we didn't even have to change the script, because the only change that we had in the whole play was when Portia, or Portia's servant, had to say, "The carriage waits," or words to that effect, and we decided to change the words to "The car is waiting, milady."
And So to Bed. Hierdie vrolike komedie is in 1937 opgevoer. Beide Muriel Alexander en Fred Goodman het daarin gespeel. Laasgenoemde was een van haar senior dramastudente in 1927 en ook 'n oorspronklike stigterslid van die vereniging. They Walk Alone en The Corn is Green. Die beroemde regisseuse Leontine Sagan het hierdie twee stukke vir hulle opgevoer. In die 40er jare het sy ook die regie gedoen van Six Characters in Search of an Author, The Women, Joan of Lorraine. Die reeks het in verskillende sale en teaters opgetree. In 1950 het hulle hulle eie teater in Braamfontein begin bou, wat toe in 1951 geopen is. Dit was die lede van die uitvoerende komitee in 1951.
Alexandra Theatre, I was asked to do the opening production of Much Ado with Margaret Ingalls as Beatrice. She was an enchanting Beatrice. But actually, it really was a bit of a picnic, because they were building the theatre practically around our ears almost until the time the curtain went up. Also, we had terrific fussation with the costumes, because the lady who was supposed to have been making the costumes, it was all arranged, suddenly she said she was very sorry. She found that she was was going to have a baby and she wouldn't be able to do it. So we were landed within about 10 days before the opening with all the ladies' costumes to make. Men's costumes were being made by somebody else. However, we got it on and it was a great success. They liked it very much.
Muriel Alexander het altesaam 46 toneelstukke vir hulle afgerig. Sy het jarenlang met liefde en toewyding in die teater gewerk. Toneel was haar liewe en natuurlik die repertory players. Sy was die voorsitter van die vereniging vanaf 1928 tot 1935 en toe Fred Goodman by haar oorgeneem het hulle haar lewenslange erepresident gemaak. In 1962 is sy benoem as lewenslange erepresident en stigter. Dr. E.G. Jansen, die destydse gouverneur-generaal, het die teater amptelik geopen. 'n Borsbeeld van Muriel Alexander is deur Gwen Franken Davies na afloop van die opvoering onthul. In 1945 is Anthony Farmer deur die Johannesburg Repertory Players genader om as artistieke direkteur by hulle aan te sluit.
Well, it was while I was out here with A King's Rhapsody that I was asked to go and see them at the newly built and newly opened Alexander Theatre. And I went up there and I was very impressed with the theatre. And to my amazement, they asked me if I would like to come back as the first professional director of the theatre. Well, of course, it's a great decision to make. I had to go back to England. I had theatre and film commitments. And then I took a deep breath, made the decision, and 25 years ago, I came out to South Africa. And here I am.
As blik van waardering het die vereniging in 1960 op haar 80ste verjaardag die teater na Muriel Alexander vernoem, die Alexander. Die destydse administrateur van die Transvaal, meneer F.H. Odendaal, het die verrigtinge waargeneem. Dit was ook tydens die 100ste opvoering van Oklahoma van Joan Brickhill en Louis Burke. Sid James en Sidney Whitcomb in Of Mice and Men. Sid James was later internasionaal bekend as speler. Deur die jare is akteurs, regisseurs, ontwerpers en tegnici deur die reps opgelei. Baie van hulle het later tot die professionele teater toegetree. Die beroemde aktrise Moira Lister het ook by hulle begin speel. Haar eerste optrede was vir Leontine Sagan in The Women in 1942. Hier speel sy in The Sleeping Prince. Die Shakespeare-opvoering The Taming of the Shrew was ook baie gewild. Die regie is gedoen deur Gwen Franken Davies. Een baie goeie opvoering van Romeo en Juliet is in 1949 deur André von Geisigem gedoen. Eugenie Haynes het die rol van Juliet vertolk. Muriel Alexander het self die rol van Juliet se oppasser vertolk. Dit was die laaste keer dat sy gespeel het. Berdien Grunewald het saam met Reginald Rawlings en Edward Ogden in Captain Cavallo opgetree. Dit was in 1952. The Wooden Dish is in 1955 opgevoer. Anne Peters, Margaret Ingalls en John Bolter was van die spelers. En in 1964 is Stop the World I Want to Get Off op die planke gebring. Leontine Sagan, die gevierde speelregisseur, het in 1933 Suid-Afrika weer die eerste keer besoek nadat sy as jong meisie terug is Duitsland toe. Dit is die aktrises wat in die toneelstuk Children in Uniform gespeel het. Met hierdie opvoering het sy internasionale roem verwerf, ook as filmregisseuse. Met hierdie 8 vroue het sy buiten Children in Uniform ook 9 to 6 opgevoer, albei stukke in die His Majesty's Teater. Daarna volg 'n hoogs suksesvolle toer van 3 maande lank. Leontine Sagan is in Hongarije gebore. Toe sy 8 jaar oud was, het haar ouers na Suid-Afrika geïmmigreer. Sy het in Duitsland haar opleiding ontvang as student van Max Reinhardt in Berlyn. Later het sy ook klas gegee aan die Max Reinhardt skool. Gedurende die Tweede Wêreldoorlog moes sy noodgedwonge uit Duitsland pad gee. In Londen werk sy saam met Ivor Novello. Sy voer Glamorous Nights op en is die eerste vrou wat regie doen in Drury Lane.
Leontine Sagan was 'n interessante mens. Sy was gewees die the grand dame of the theater was Leontine. En sy was typisch Duits, onverbiddelijk in haar regie. Sy het nooit toegelaat dat enige ding, enige actie wat sy neergelê het, verander word nie. En sy het ook werkelijk Afrikaans, waarbij graag Afrikaanse regie doen. Maar sy het nooit die geleentheid gehad om dit te doen nie. En sy het ons feitelijk een nationale toneel, als sy ook een lid was, het sy regie gedoen in Engels. En sy was natuurlijk ook die vrou wat ons hele standaard van die Engelse toneel, denk ik, op een hoop artistieke peil gesteld het.
Now, Leontine was perhaps the most elegant person I've ever seen. She was tall and she used to wear long sweeping dresses, picture hats, and she scared us all to death. She'd come straight from Drury Lane, from doing the dancing years with Ivor Novello, and we hardly dared to talk to her. In fact, I once ventured to ask her after a first read-through of a play. We had one actor, Professor Grant, who had a photographic memory. He knew his part after having looked at it once, and he gave practically a performance at the first reading. And I said to Leontine, "Don't you think Professor Grant was rather good?" And she said, "Yes, he was very good. I don't suppose he'll ever be as good again." And, well, we learnt a lot from her. You simply had to do what she wanted.
Well, she was a very ascetic lady, very disciplined. She would get up at 6 in the morning and she would do the plotting for the day, and she loathed having anywhere comfortable to work. When we rehearsed Major Barbara, we worked in the most terrifying place, somewhere down in Fordsburg, which she had found. It was a kind of old warehouse, and we crept up rather rat-ridden stairs to this empty, very bleak, very spooky place. But she adored it, you see. She was a great disciplinarian and quite frightening sometimes to people, but I thought she was really splendid. She was a marvelous woman and very, very dedicated. Germanic a little, I suppose, you know. But she taught me a lot, and I was very grateful to her.
En Sagan, ik heb met haar gewerkt voor NTO. Ik heb haar redelijk goed gekend. En ik heb weer met haar gewerkt. Zij was een prachtige persoon, je weet zo. En als zij van de speler gehouden het, nee, je weet, dan zei ze weer, ik onthou één speler zei gezegd, speak too slowly. Faster. En die kerel begon ook dat. En zij draait haar rug op en says, "When you are finished, I will look at you."
Leontine Sagan, I suppose, was the greatest influence on my life. Although I had gone overseas and studied and did all the things I had to do at the academies and worked, it's when I got back into this country and back here to Johannesburg that Leontine gave me my opportunity of playing most of my parts. I was directed by Leontine. Oh, I'm called a termagant, but wash. She was the toughest taskmaster I ever knew. She would allow nothing but nothing to pass.
As a producer, for a young, insecure, frightened, meek, and respectful actress, she was tough, Teutonic, hard, even a little cruel. To those who had the temerity to answer her back, she was not so cruel. However, we learnt an enormous lot from her. She was a great producer.
I had the great pleasure of working with Leontine Saga, and I played for her in the Cradle Song. And of course, she was a tremendous personality. She exuded a sort of aura. I don't know what it was about her quite, but you felt you were in a presence. And she had a tremendous feeling for what would work in the theatre, her sense of style, her sense of movement, her sense of grouping was supreme. She could be very cutting, but always very controlled. And one did learn a tremendous lot from her and her attitude. She was dedicated, of course, to her work and to the theatre.
I remember being reduced to tears so often. And playing for her once. I was rehearsing in the morning, doing Lady Macbeth, scenes of Lady Macbeth, trying to keep my best English going and for the beat of the meter. In the afternoon, I did a German part with Moira Lister. We were doing something. And the evening, I was also rehearsing for her, a Russian, with a Russian accent. And I once said to her, "How is my accent coming, Miss Sagan?" And she said, I always called her Miss Sagan, even to the end, "What accent?" You see, she was relentless. But later, I began to realize it was a job. She was creating things in those early days. We had hardly any audiences. It was important that we should give of our best.
Leontine Sagan was as regisseuse bekend in Duitsland, Engeland en in Amerika. Met Ivor Novello het sy 6 jaar saamgewerk en groot sukses met haar opvoerings in Londen behaal. Sy het weer in 1939 na Suid-Afrika gekom, skitterende werk gedoen en so 'n groot bydrae gelewer tot die ontwikkeling van die Engelse teater. Mevrou Sagan was ten gunste van nasionale toneel en het ook die eerste Engelse stuk, De Brutus, vir NTO afgerig.
When Sarah Churchill was in this country, she gave me a poem that she wrote to her father, Winston Churchill. A beautiful poem. And when the Leontine Sagan's family asked me to speak at her cremation, I chose to speak the poem that Sarah wrote to her father on his death. Because I knew Leontine well. She didn't want sentiment, she didn't want tears. And I'd like to say it again, and remembering her. Forgive me if the day you die, I do not cry. The simplest reason that I know you said you'd rather have it so, and that I held my head serenely high, remembering the glory that was ours. Forgive me if the day you die, I do not cry. And again, forgive me if I do.
In 1947 het sy en haar man, Dr. Victor Fleischer, na Suid-Afrika gekom om hulle hier te vestig. In haar later leeftyd het sy gesê, ek sal ook nie meer na die teater terugkeer nie. Ek het nie meer die geduld daarvoor nie. En dit sou ek nooit kon dink nie. Sy sterf in Mei 1974 op 81-jarige leeftyd. Margaret Ingalls en Nan Munro was nog 2 bekende aktrises wat gedurende die Tweede Wêreldoorlog en daarna 'n groot bydrae gelewer het tot die ontwikkeling van die teater in Suid-Afrika. Die tyd toe veral die Engelse teater hoofsaaklik afhanklik was van amateuropvoerings. Hulle was saam verantwoordelik vir die stigting van 'n professionele toneelgeselskap, die Munro Ingalls Company.
The Munro Ingalls Company was formed, I think it was in 1942, because Nan Munro had brought her children out from the bombing, you know, in London, and that was when I first met her. I was working with the South African Broadcasting at the time, and we decided we would form a company and take plays to the troops. We took them to the Air Force camps and to the military camps, and you know, at first people thought we were absolutely mad to take straight plays to the troops, because what they, you know, were used to seeing, of course, were the gay concert parties and the saucy jokes and the pretty girls and the chorus lines and all that. However, we decided to risk it. And in the end, I mean, we ended up playing short of them. We started off with an enchanting play by Fagin called And So to Bed. It was the, based on Samuel Pepys and his wife. And then that we followed with Full House, the Ivor Novello play. And they were enormous successes. And after we toured the Air Force and the military camps, we played in Johannesburg and in Pretoria. And then we would do a little tour. But we didn't do the tour until African theatres, who saw that we really were having marvellous seasons in Johannesburg. They said, you know, how about coming and working with us?
And then African theatres said, well, now you deserve to make some money yourselves. So we formed the Munro Ingalls Company, a professional company then, and we travelled all over South Africa and Rhodesia, playing these plays that we had rehearsed to the troops and making money with them.
Old Ladies was een van die toneelstukke wat hulle vir die soldate opgevoer het, met groot sukses. Daarna volg My Sister Eileen, 'n komedie. En toe die gewilde Pygmalion van George Bernard Shaw. Terence Rattigan se drama The Winslow Boy was hulle volgende aanbieding. Terselfdertyd is ook Lady Frederick opgevoer.
In 1946, the Munro Ingalls Company really nearly came, you know, was just about at the end of its life because my husband was transferred to England and Nan went back there to live. And so we were 4 years in England and I worked there. And when I came back in 1950, I formed the Margaret Ingalls Company, now being all on my own. And the first thing I did was a play called Janus. And I toured that to Cape Town, Durban, Port Elizabeth, and so on, and lost so much money that I put myself out of work for 2 years. Not out of work, but out of management, you know. I absolutely lost my boots. And following that, I had another disaster with the Phoenix Too Frequent and the Browning version, which Cape Town absolutely loathed. And so once again, I was thrown on the mercies of more or less other people to give me work. And during that time, I joined the board of National Theatre.
Margaret Ingalls was nie net lid van die beheerraad van die nasionale toneelorganisasie nie, maar sy het ook verskeie toneelstukke vir hulle afgerig. En natuurlik het sy ook aan baie van die NTO-stukke gespeel. In 1953 het sy Hamlet in die Windmill Theater opgevoer met Siegfried Meinhard in die hoofrol. Sy self het die rol van Gertrude, die koningin-moeder, vertolk. Love in Idleness was die volgende toneelstuk wat sy opgevoer het. En daarmee het sy meer geld verdien as wat sy nog ooit tevore in die theater gemaak het.
The Langford Ingalls Company was formed in 1962. My husband had died some years before, and I married Robert Langford, and we formed this company.
Saam met haar man, die acteur Robert Langford, het sy 'n hele paar toneelstukke op die planke gebring. Opvoerings soos Gaslight, The Physicist van Dürrenmatt en Woman in a Dressing Gown. Dit was een van haar geliefkoeste rolle. Die Langford Ingalls geselskap het ongeveer 4 jaar bestaan.
The last thing I did was on my own again as the Margaret Ingalls Company because my husband had left the theatre. And I did this one-woman show, Have Suitcase, Will Travel. And that was in 72. And then in 73, I really started to move over to live in England. And in 76, and that was it.
Sy het verskillende rolle vertolk in Have Suitcase, Will Travel. Hierdie eenmansvertoning van haar was uiters gewild, oral in die land. Maynardville, Kaapstad se tuiste van Shakespeare, is vandag algemeen bekend by theaterliefhebbers in ons land. 'n Groen lushof by die mooiste oleanderlanings. Maar hierdie openluchttheater is die troetelkind van Cecilia Sonnenberg en René Arendsen. Toe hulle dit die eerste keer in 1956 vir die somerseisoen gehuur het, was dit 'n pragtige, maar verlate landgoed. Dit het verbeeldingskrag en deursettingsvermoë gekos om dit om te tower in 'n wêreld waar mense al onvergeetlike ondervindings beleef het. Die grond is in 1844 deur James Mortimer Maynard gekoop. In 1949 het sy nageslag dit aan die Kaapstadse Stadsraad verkoop. Cecilia Sonnenberg en René Arendsen het toe reeds 'n ver pad in die teaterwêreld geloop. Hulle was albei lede van die destydse Cape Town Repertory Theater en gedurende die Tweede Wêreldoorlog het hulle eie teatergroep Spotlight gestig. Nadat hulle ooreenkoms met die Kaapstadse Stadsraad aangegaan het vir die huur van Maynardville, moes die toegegroeide landgoed in 'n teater omgeskep word. Hiermee het die Stadsraad hulle baie gehelp. In 1955 was mevrou Sonnenberg en Arendsen in Londen, waar hulle Leslie French ontmoet het. Hulle het hom gevra om die regie van hulle eerste opvoering, The Taming of the Shrew, te doen. Tot hulle groot vreugde het hy ingestem. Met die tweede seisoen in 1957 het hy weer die regie gedoen. Toe het hulle A Midsummer Night's Dream opgevoer. Hy het self die rol van Puck vertolk, natuurlik skitterend. Daarna het hy gereeld met hulle saamgewerk, of as speler of as regisseur.
Maynardville has been our life for more than 25 years. We actually tried for some time to find a place to do what we've done with Maynardville, and it took us about 2 or 3 years before we found the spot that we're in now, which is very well known to everybody, of course. And when we found it, of course, it was the business of getting it made into a theatre, which was all very exciting, and we had tremendous help from the Cape Town City Council.
We had both been inspired by the success of the great world-famous Regent's Park in London. And we thought if they, with their horrific climatic conditions, can run this show, Cape Town must be a piece of cake. And we set about looking for a suitable venue. It wasn't difficult. There are many, many places it could have been. But I'll say this, and René said this, and we've said it ad nauseum. Let me just say it briefly for those who don't know, that when we walked through the gates of Maynardville down the Oleander Avenue, we knew we were home. We found there a desolate but very beautiful garden with 100-year-old oaks, filled with neglect and potential. Well, then we set about the hard work. But we were young, energetic, enthusiastic. No stumbling block was heavy enough not to be pushed over, no problem insuperable, and the miracles just had to take a little longer.
The Taming of the Shrew was our first show. One might think that A Midsummer Night's Dream may have been, or should have been, the first one, but we decided just to go against that. And The Taming of the Shrew was a great success. That was the one show that we didn't know whether it could be a success or not, and that etched out the pattern for our future work.
It was an hilarious production, primitive to a degree. We had built a little stage in the front, and we had to climb up very precarious steps at the back with our voluminous costumes to get onto the stage. Leslie brought a sway-backed horse on with Petruchio facing the wrong way, and he himself went behind as Grumio with a little pan and brush. Everything in the front was Heath Robinson-ish, the lighting, the sound, the hired chairs. But never mind, it was a start, and it caught the imagination of the public, and from there on, we were off.
Midsummer Night's Dream, yes, that was our next play, and Cecilia and I both played in that. Cecilia played in the first one, The Taming of the Shrew, and we played Helena and Hermia in the second play. It was great fun, and one night it rained and we got soaked, and, well, this is one of the difficulties of Maynardville. But it's amazing how little it rains and how few shows throughout the years we've had to cancel.
Romeo and Juliet itself was so beautiful. I was lucky enough to see this little girl, Lindsay Baxter, playing with Vanessa Redgrave some months earlier in London, and when I reported to my colleagues that I thought she'd be a sensational Juliet, they went along with this and we engaged her. She was indeed sensational.
Deur die jare het van ons land se heel beste akteurs aan die Maynardville opvoerings deelgeneem. Baie skoliere woon ook gereeld die opvoerings by. Onder die sterre, omring deur groot groen ou eike, dis Maynardville, 'n gewaardeerde teaterinstelling in Suid-Afrika. Romeo en Juliet. Hierdie Shakespeare-stuk is deur Renée Arendsen en Cecilia Sonnenberg gekies om die 25ste bestaanjaar van Maynardville te vier. Dit was 'n pragtige opvoering. Juliet is gespeel deur die Engelse aktrise Lindsay Baxter.
Sweet repose and rest come to thy heart as that within my breast.
Oh, wilt thou leave me so unsatisfied?
What satisfaction canst thou have tonight?
The exchange of thy love's faithful vow for mine.
To give thee mine before thou didst request it. And yet, oh, I would it were to give again.
Wouldst thou withdraw it? For what purpose, love?
To be frank and give it thee again. And yet, I wish but for the thing I have. My bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love as deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite.
Madam!
I hear some noise within. Dear love, adieu.
Madam!
Anon, good nurse. Sweet Montague, be true. Stay but a little, I will come again.
Oh, blessed, blessed night! I am afeard. Being in night, all this is but a dream. Too flattering sweet to be substantial.
3 words, dear Romeo, and good night indeed. If that thy bent of love be honourable, thy purpose marriage, send me word tomorrow by one that I'll procure to come to thee, where and what time thou wilt perform the rite. And all my fortunes at thy foot I'll lay, and follow thee, my lord, throughout the world.
Madam!
I come anon, but if thou meanst not well, I do beseech thee.
Madam!
By and by I come, to cease thy suit, and leave me to my grief. Tomorrow will I send.
So thrive my soul.
1,000 times good night.